Hey guys, how are you doing today? It's P. Gilbert, your blogger, writing consultant, and the author to the fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter. And today we are honoured to have an interview with the YouTuber and writing coach, Kiingo Creative. Kiingo's real name is Ross Hartman. He is a terrific guy and has an excellent knowledge range, not least when it comes to writing tips. Here is the interview. Enjoy. So, to get to know you a bit better, where do you come from and has this place influenced your writings at all?
Yeah, I'm Southern California, so I was born here. I've moved around a couple places in the States, but I'm back. And as far as influencing my writing goes, I very much live in the virtual world, so I guess I wouldn't really say that the location has influenced me too much. Um, but I just get a bunch of inspiration from online, I guess you could say. I live in the virtual world.
Cool. Whatever works for you. Good. What made you decide to become a writing coach?
Yeah, that's an interesting one because I would say I never consciously made the decision to become a writing coach. It was more so like I need to learn more about storytelling and writing. So I really dove into that. And from that study and research, I kind of shared what I found in different blog posts and on social media. And people have questions when you share ideas with them. So I responded and it kind of just organically grew into that.
Brilliant. What does being a writing coach entail on a day-to-day basis, and what services do you offer?
Yeah, so there are kind of two main industries for storytelling, right? There's book writing, novel writing, creative writing, and then there's screenwriting, which includes obviously feature films and TV. And the name by which a writing coaches are known by different titles in the different industries. And so with screenwriting, it's like script consulting, sometimes story doctoring. But it might also be known as like development editing services, story coaching, or just a writing coach. So I offer all of those services, no matter what you want to call it. And as far as what it entails, it's interesting. I heard this quote. I don't remember who it is, but it's basically that writing is 99% problem solving. And I completely feel that. Like every story is a unique problem to be solved. And so the thing that I primarily do as a writing coach is take the theory and try to recognize when it's applicable in a story and then work with the writer to apply it and solve the problems that they're coming up against.
Great. Good. Wow, that's something. You're very talented, as you've just shown us, you've just demonstrated, and you have an astonishing amount of knowledge in terms of how to craft a story. How have you acquired all this knowledge? Is it something you've read, watched, observed, or learned through experience?
Mm. So this is both good and bad, but I can say that I am a heavy researcher, which also means I'm a heavy procrastinator when it comes to writing. So if I feel like I have a problem, I will dive into the topic and the problem and basically consume anything I can find on it. So that does include essentially all the writing books across both the screenwriting industry and creative writing. And it is interesting because those two industries can learn a lot from each other. We're just talking about storytelling here. And then there are just some great resources online too, like Film Courage is a fantastic YouTube channel for interviews with screenwriters and producers and directors, and you can learn about storytelling from that. I also listen to podcasts as much as I can, script notes, and there's the authorship podcast. There's Writescast. There's a bunch of different ones. So short answer is I read and consume anything I can find about storytelling.
Best way to do it.
Yeah.
You give a lot of advice on a lot of topics. It's very impressive, again,
Thank
in
you.
different genres about the story writing process, whether it be love, horror, fantasy, etc. Where is your area of expertise, would you say?
Hmm. So I don't know that I'd necessarily call it my area of expertise. I guess I would say for expertise, it's more of the fundamentals of storytelling. But I would say that my most interest is in fantasy and sci-fi, so kind of speculative fiction. I think that fascinates me most because I'm really, really into world building. I think world building is one of the most fun things you can do. And obviously, it's easy to get caught up in it and again procrastinate the actual writing process. But it is to me one of the most rewarding parts of storytelling and creative in general. So speculative fiction.
Cool, good. What three books, films, TV shows, franchises, theatrical productions, etc., have significantly changed your thinking, either in general or with regards to the story writing process?
Mm, this is a great, great question.
Oh, thank you. I came
And
up with it myself.
it's also great because you're not asking what are your three favorite books or three favorite films. You're asking what are the ones that have changed your perspective. And
Yeah.
so my answers for films on this is different than my three favorite films, but they're the ones that have changed my perspective as far as storytelling goes. And that's The Graduate, Lars and the Real Girl, and Forrest Gump. And
Mhm.
the reason, there are a bunch of different reasons, but a few of them are that, The Graduate, for instance, has a passive main character. And you'll hear in writing tips that you must always have an active protagonist. Like it is the
Agency,
number one
yes.
thing. And people will hound on you that, well, if your story's not working, it's because you don't have an active protagonist. But if we think about that, we have to take a step back and think about what the purpose of an active protagonist is. And it is to work toward a goal. And that is when your story is driven by dramatic tension. So when your story is driven by a goal seeking process, which is 95% of stories. However, it is possible to keep the reader or the audience interested using a different technique. And namely, in the case of The Graduate, for instance, that's dramatic irony. And dramatic irony is where the audience knows something and potentially one or more characters, they know something that another character doesn't know. And so in The Graduate, Ben is having an affair with Mrs. Robinson, and it's basically a secret that he's keeping. And so the whole story, or at least the majority of Act Two, is about him keeping that secret. This is the same in Dexter, right? A lot of the interest in Dexter is driven by the fact that we're wondering whether Dexter will be discovered and his secret will be found out. So it's a huge part of what drives that story. I can say the same with Lars and the Real Girl. He doesn't really have a massive desire. It's kind of the community around him that wants to change him. And so that also makes me think that the community can have a desire rather than just the main character. And then in Forrest Gump, it's that fantastic use of uh, a storyteller. And then additionally, it's got a character who also doesn't really have a super strong goal, but the the interest in the story is driven again by dramatic irony because we know what the historical events are and we know kind of what's going to happen, so that also creates some interest. So that's a really long answer. And I'll also say for books that have influenced my storytelling process, The Anatomy of Story, The Secrets of Story, and The Sequence Approach. So those have all just been fantastic. The Anatomy of Story, John Sherby, he is my storytelling guiding light, I guess you
Yeah.
could say.
Guru, yeah, I could
Yeah,
say that.
he's he has figured out the thematic approach to storytelling and the foundation, how it works on those mechanical levels, and in a way that also creates an organic story. So that's just fantastic.
Your answer is a fantastic one as well. However
Thank you.
long you may think it is, it's a brilliant, brilliant answer. I like it a lot. Thank you.
Thank you.
What three things do you like to see the most in a story?
Hmm. This is a great question too. Um, Three things. So, as I mentioned earlier, I like story worlds. So, me personally, I want to see a unique story world that we haven't seen before. Obviously, it can be influenced by other story worlds, but something about it should be unique. And then the other thing that's most important, I would say, for an intriguing plot is a series of revelations. We want to be consistently surprised in a positive way that the story or the opponent's plan or something like that is more complex or deeper than we had initially imagined. So when we find out, Luke, I am your father, we find out there are relationships, or we find out that the hero's been hiding something, or the villain's been hiding something. Those sort of revelations really create an intriguing story to me. And then thirdly is the use of promises. So a promise is a promise that there's some future event of significance in the story. And as Paul Galino would say, that kind of creates direction in your story, and it tells us where we're going to go. It creates anticipation. And by creating that anticipation, then you are free to upend that anticipation and subvert those expectations. But you got to set them first before you can subvert them. One of my favorite examples is from Casablanca, where Captain Renault says to Rick, paraphrasing here, like, Rick, there's going to be an arrest in your cafe tonight. And so that just sets us up for, we know that that's coming, and that's a powerful way of keeping us engaged.
Cool. I'm very glad you used that example and not something like the death of the Night King from Game of Thrones. We're all expecting it to be Jon Snow, and out of nowhere, Arya jumps out and kills him.
Well, that is
spoiler alert, by the way.
You know what, though? That is such a powerful example of when subverting expectations, of the principle that subverting expectations is not good for its own sake. You know, it's not, we don't just want something to come out of left field. It needs to be satisfying, and that's tough to do, but there are ways to do it. Absolutely
agree with you. To invert this question, what are your 3 pet peeves in the story writing process? In short, what don't you like to see? And do you advise your clients and classes not to do them?
Yeah, this is a good one. So I'll say one of the things I don't like to see is preaching, which is sending a thematic message on the nose when a character says to the audience, you know, you're living life incorrectly and this is how you should be living. I think that is ineffective, essentially. If you're really trying to get a message across to the audience, or you're trying to influence them in some way, that will probably turn them off and make them less likely to adopt that worldview. But the way you do convey a message is through structure and through character change, through community influence, through worldviews and opinions. So that's one sort of pet peeve. And then another one is on-the-nose dialogue when it comes to emotions. So it is important to note that on-the-nose dialogue in and of itself isn't necessarily bad. This is another place where I kind of go against some of the conventional wisdom here. A character like John Wayne, for instance, in a Western, that character is what we might call a high status character. They're not going to speak indirectly. They're not going to speak in subtext. Anything they say is going to be direct. But when it comes to emotions, characters should generally be speaking subtextually. If 2 characters are deeply in love and they're just saying how much they love each other, while that conveys the point that they love each other, it's generally not interesting. And it's more interesting if the characters have something at stake emotionally, and there's the sort of threat of losing the relationship if they mess up. And so the words have to be spoken indirectly. And I think that's far more interesting. And so the third thing would be just generally a lack of disruptions. And we might also say that's a lack of revelations. So if the story is not flopping back and forth between hope and fear. So if it's just mostly hope or it's just mostly fear, I want to see a contrast essentially in those 2 emotions. And you can do that through providing promises, providing problems and opportunities and kind of swapping back between those.
Brilliant answer. We had a really good discussion recently about creating a fantasy world, about world building.
Yeah.
Have you ever created your own fantasy world? And what elements are you most proud of in that world?
Yeah. So I have. And it's funny because the more I learn, the less I like about it. Like the more I learn, the more I feel like it's a little bit derivative, but I still am super proud of it, and I still want to explore it more and create new story worlds. But one of the things I was most proud of was kind of the convergence of magic and technology. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with Sanderson's three laws, kind of the three laws of magic. And they're kind of three storytelling laws in general. And the interesting thing about them is that they apply really to problem solving. I don't remember the three off the top of my head. I think one is like you need to foreshadow, basically. Two is that there need to be limits and costs to magic. And three is that you want to look at how existing elements can intertwine before you explore new ones. And the interesting part of this is that it also applies to technology, not just magic. And in a strange way, as far as storytelling is concerned, magic and technology are kind of two sides of the same coin. They have the same function in storytelling. And so generally, rules that we can apply to magic can also be applied to technology. And this is a place where there's a huge overlap between sci-fi and fantasy. So for the world that I was creating, it was sort of a sci-fi fantasy world that had scientific discovery implications that led to technology that seems like magic. So there's that quote, I forget what it is, but it's like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And I think that's
Never heard it, but great.
yeah. So that's what I was proud of, kind of that overlap of technology and magic.
I never would have seen that answer coming, and it's very refreshing to hear it. Thank you. You have written many posts on Instagram about villains and how to create villains. What three things in your mind make the ideal villain or antagonist, I should say?
Yeah, I love villains. And
Good.
that is a great question. I think a lot about like what makes an interesting villain, and it is subjective, of course. You know, there are some people that like villains who are evil for their own sake, and that kind of goes with the monster archetype. Like there doesn't need to be a backstory, there doesn't need to be an intense motivation. This guy's just evil, or this animal's just evil, or this robot's just evil. But I personally like when a villain has a deeper backstory. I know that's not for everybody, but I like that. And so the first thing I would say is I like when a villain is intensely motivated, and that motivation generally comes from some ghost from a character's past, some trauma or some wound, some experience that they blame on others and that they can't let go of. And so that's one of the things that's most interesting. And then a second thing would be when a villain or an antagonist is creative about the way they go about attaining power. So generally, when a villain blames someone else, they want to inflict pain or maybe revenge or something like that. They want to influence the world around them. And in order to do that, you've got to have power. So it's really a question of how a villain goes about attaining that power. Might have to do with immortality, or in Star Wars, just get the super weapon, right? And then you rule over others via threats. So there's a bunch of different ways. That's maybe not the most creative, but it is a really powerful way to do it in that story world, because that really goes with the story world. It's thematically cohesive and everything. So I like creative methods to attaining power. And then third would be villains that force others into moral dilemmas. And the prototypical example I think of this would be the Joker from The Dark Knight, the one who just puts other people in no-win situations and makes them make a decision. And I think that is a great way of conveying the character's worldview, but also just dastardly. It's, mustache twirling villain.
Absolutely right. Keeping with villains, what differs an anti-hero from a villain or an antagonist in your mind? And which two anti-heroes have you enjoyed reading or watching the most?
This is a good question, and I don't think I've ever seen an agreed upon definition of an anti-hero. And I think, in the writing community, we do have so many different definitions for the same words. So I'll kind of give two different definitions that I've seen. One is just a good person who's turned bad for sympathetic reasons. And for that, I would say Walter White is my favorite anti-hero. Someone who, and that's one of the reasons why I loved watching Breaking Bad, and I loved watching his gradual decline, because to me, there wasn't any one point where it was like, he shouldn't be taking this step. It was like, okay, that makes sense after experiencing everything he's experienced and given the motivation he has. I get why he's doing that. And that was such a powerful character corruption arc. I just loved that. So the other definition of an anti-hero might be like telling the story from the villain's perspective, where the protagonist is actually the villain. And when it comes to that, I think one of my most favorite was Lou Bloom in Nightcrawler. So he is, I loved watching
Jake Gyllenhaal's film.
What was that?
Was that a Jake Gyllenhaal film?
Yes, exactly.
Yes, I have seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. And I loved that because he was intensely motivated. He was creative in solving problems. And because he was a psychopath or sociopath, he had nothing holding him back. So any means were open to him to reach his ends. And to me, that is just a fascinating thing to watch. It's not necessarily something you want to emulate, but it is something that's fascinating. And when it comes to anti-heroes, there's something that Aaron Sorkin said that sticks with me. He basically said, anti-heroes are sort of making their case to God as to why they should get into heaven. And it's always a flawed case, right? But they always believe it wholeheartedly. And I think that's a good perspective to take on anti-heroes.
I've written 2 blog pieces on anti-heroes, and neither of them cover the points you've made. So that's brilliant in my mind. Thank you.
Well, I need to read yours. That's awesome.
Thanks. Change it around the questions now and more a bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure.
If you could go back in time and speak to a younger Ross Hartman, what advice would you give him about the writing process, or becoming a writing coach? What would you say to him?
Well, first of all, I wish that I could talk to the future Ross Hartman and find out what he has to say. But if I were going to go back to the old one, I would say first to write what interests you. And sometimes I take too much of an analytical approach to storytelling and say, what do I think readers would like to read? Or what do I think would be the most broadly accepted? But the problem with that is, if it doesn't interest you in particular, you'll never actually write it. And it's such a, I'm sure everyone knows this and everyone recognizes this, but I can't say it to myself enough. I need to dive into things that I actually enjoy. And then second is that plots don't need to be groundbreaking. So I'm also a songwriter, and one of the mistakes I make in songwriting is trying to figure out a song that hasn't been done before, like figure out some unique approach that doesn't exist. And there's no real reason to do that. And that's the same with plots, because the stuff that resonates with an audience and resonates with a reader is not necessarily unique twists that are completely groundbreaking. It's these plots that have just a slight new light on them. And so it's taking what's mostly familiar and seeing it in a slightly new way. And then the third thing I would say is that drama is everything when it comes to storytelling. And the rules of drama are simple, which is, what does a character want? What stands in their way? What do they lose if they don't get it? Why do they have to get this sooner rather than later? And why do they want this? And if you can answer those 5 questions in every scene and in every story, while there are certainly other things that could, stop you, that will probably get you in the right direction.
You should go back in time to a younger Ross Hartman as soon as possible. What
That
do
would be
you
nice.
find the most, thanks. What do you find the most challenging part of the writing process?
Yeah, I kind of mentioned this earlier, but to me, writing is problem solving. And so the most challenging part of the writing process is that every story is uniquely challenging. And the goal, one of my goals, and what I aspire to do as a writing coach is to figure out the underlying mechanics that can broadly be applied to a story so that these things that seem uniquely challenging are actually rooted in not following the first principles of story. So they're rooted in straying away from either keeping the audience interested or explaining a worldview or a message through theme and thematic cohesion. So problem solving is the most challenging part. And anytime I can figure out a way to better identify problems, I feel better about that.
Can understand, and I totally get that.
Mm.
How has writing or being a writing coach changed you?
Cool. That's a good one. I have learned that it's nearly impossible for us to be objective about ourselves. So while I can see in other people's stories exactly what's wrong, and I can give them advice all day long, and I can properly apply the mechanics of storytelling to what they're doing, it's significantly harder for me to see that in my own stories. And I think it's the same reason that lawyers hire lawyers and doctors hire doctors, because we are unique. We have these unique blind spots when it comes to ourselves and our own creative work. But we are, for some reason, clear-eyed when it comes to others, generally. And that's something, that's a way that being a writing coach has changed me. And I like to try to be more objective about my own work, but it's always tough to do.
Good, good. That's very big of you to admit. Are you writing a book or a novel at present? And if so, can you tell us a bit about it, please?
Yes, I'm writing a book about storytelling. Of course, I've got, and the interesting thing is it's mainly for me. I'm going to release it to everybody, obviously, but it's really to get my thoughts down on paper because I have a lot of thoughts after having read and viewed all of this different information and trying to bring it all together into one thing. And that's what the book is. It's trying to bring together all this disparate information and all of this conflicting information, honestly, because the thing in the writing community is that we've got different words for different things and we've got different definitions for different things. Everybody's speaking a different language. There's no common nomenclature. The other problem is that a lot of books focus on symptoms rather than causes. They focus on and they address the symptoms of story problems, but they don't look at the underlying reason why those symptoms are arising. Pixar has this motto, I guess you could say, that's tools, not rules. And that is one of the driving principles of the book, that we need to learn the storytelling rules that go in our the storytelling tools that go in our toolbox, but recognize that these are not strict rules, but rather they're tools that have effects. And we decide on the effect we want to have first, and then we look at what tool will provide that effect. And so in that way, do we want a main character who's active? In most cases, probably, because it keeps the audience interested, but not necessarily. And if we don't have a main character that's active, well, we are making a trade-off there. And there's going to be less narrative drive in our story. It's going to slow things down. But there are other advantages we get. So, storytelling is a series of trade-offs. And the more you can recognize what those trade-offs are, the better prepared you'll be to craft an engaging story. And so that's the central principle of the book, is how do we expand our storytelling toolbox and tackle stories from tools rather than rules.
I look forward to reading it when it's ready.
I will make a plug here since we're talking about this. If you are interested in finding out more about the book or being notified when it comes out, go to kiingo.com, Kiingo.com, and you can sign up for the newsletter.
I most certainly will, Kiingo. Lastly, outside of writing and being a writing coach, what do you like to do in your spare time?
That's a great question. So there's very little time outside of that, but in the time that I do have, I enjoy songwriting and programming. And I think one of the things that songwriting, programming, and writing all have in common is that they are puzzle solving activities. And they're problem solving activities. Like you have a specific problem and trying to fit the pieces of a song together, for instance, or make a program work. You have something ahead of you that is not working, that you generally need to go back to the central principles about why that thing works or how that thing works and apply that. So to me, that is one of the coolest things about life, is solving problems and solving puzzles, although not literal puzzles. I don't enjoy those.
And that's all I have for you today, guys. Thank you for watching, and I hope you have enjoyed this interview with the YouTuber and writing consultant, Kiingo Creative. Like, comment, and hit that subscribe button, and tell me, what did you think of the interview? Are you looking forward to Kiingo's book as well? In the description below, I have left links to Kiingo's website, his YouTube channel, and to his Instagram account. I strongly recommend that you check out his stuff. Kiingo's materials are top quality and really helpful as well. Moreover, my debut fantasy novella, The Sultan's Daughter, is out. If you enjoy reading a book that is short, fast-paced and full of suspense, then check it out. I have left a link in the description below for that as well. Otherwise, until next time, keep well. Once again, guys, I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching my video. I really appreciate it and I hope you've enjoyed it. Hit that subscribe button and then you will be the first to receive more awesome content from my channel, and I hope to see you again soon.